Immigration between worlds doesn't look like you think. There's no glowing portal in the middle of an empty field. No robed figure waving people through with a staff. It looks like a terminal, a bad one. Low ceilings, stale air, fluorescent lights that hum just off pitch, and a line of arrivals that never really ends, just snakes out of sight and comes back around from another direction. My name is Marcus. Officially, I'm an immigration adjudicator assigned to Station E7, Subterranean Transit Hub, Geneva. Unofficially, I stamp passports for heaven's least favorite neighbors. The surface world thinks this place is a logistics facility under the United Nations campus. Freight, data, diplomats shuttled through secure entrances. That's technically true. Trucks go in and out. Security badges beep at turnstiles. People with lanyards and tote bags talk about climate targets and trade agreements. None of them have clearance for the 6 levels below B3. Our checkpoint sits between layers of reinforced concrete and something older than the building's foundations. You don't get here by elevator, not really. You go down with an escort, pass through 3 biometric gates, sign 2 separate non-disclosure agreements in 2 different alphabets, and ride a lift whose buttons are labeled with sigils, not numbers. When the doors open, you step into a corridor that feels like an airport gate and a confessional booth had a child in a bunker. On my left, a row of interview booths, glass-fronted, each with a table, 2 chairs, and a discrete array of recording devices embedded in the walls. On my right, a continuous desk with terminals, printers, scanners, and an old-fashioned stamp that weighs more than it should. Ahead, the arrivals hall. Arrivals looks almost normal at first glance. Metal detectors, baggage scanners, roped lanes, a big backlit sign that says, "Welcome to Transit Station E7, present documents, declare all vows, curses, and binding agreements." Most people don't read the second line. Most people aren't people. They come in all shapes. Some wear human skins like suits tailored badly on purpose. Some don't bother. I've processed arrivals that looked like clouds of ash, flocks of dark birds knitted into a single intent, a shadow that remembered being a man and was trying very hard to pretend it still was. The scanners don't care how you manifest. They read what you are: category, origin, metaphysical status, outstanding warrants. My job is simple: check the manifest, check the documents, check the clauses in a treaty no one will ever admit exists. Then decide whether they go back, go through, or go into a holding pattern that may as well be forever. The treaty is called, in the files, the Bilateral Compact on Transliminal Migration Management. It has one human signature, a representative of the Holy See, acting on behalf of relevant earthly jurisdictions. The other signatory is not written in any language I speak, but I know who it is. Everyone down here does. We just don't say the name out loud at work. The compact is exclusive. No angels. No neutral parties. No third heavens or outer courts. It is a corridor carved directly between what the Vatican calls the external seat and what the rest of the world would clumsily, desperately label hell. The United Nations thinks it manages this station. The Vatican thinks it manages the United Nations. And the other side thinks it manages both. I think I manage a desk. It keeps me sane. At 1857 station time, my shift began the way most do. Briefing, coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through an old cassock, and a quick argument about quotas. Last quarter's numbers came back, Ortiz said, sliding a tablet across the cramped break room table. We're above target on refusals. Headquarters is nervous. Ortiz is level 2 adjudications, 2 years older than me, 10 years more cynical. His badge hangs crooked on his shirt. His tie has tiny, tasteful crosses woven into the fabric. He insists they're just pattern. Nervous how? I asked, skimming the numbers. Origin codes, destination codes, percentages, Category D entities, Category F, Category K, refusal rates, temporary clearances, permanent transfers. Concerns have been raised about bottlenecks in the transliminal corridor, he read, using his best impression of a lawyer who has never seen the inside of a church. Which is code for someone on the other side feels disrespected. That or the Holy See's internal factions don't want to explain why the infernal population keeps backing up on their end, I said. He smirked. You say that louder and you'll be reassigned to archives or confessional support. Confessional support is a myth, I said, like transparent budgeting. Our supervisor stepped in before the conversation could turn into gallows humor about pensions again. Director Leone was tall, gray-haired, and wore the kind of expression that made you stand up straighter whether you believed in hell or not. His collar was priest's black when he came down here the first year. Now he wore a civilian shirt and a diplomatic pin on his lapel. The job changes you. Briefing, he said. 5 minutes. Conference 1. We gathered around the hollow table in Conference 1. 7 adjudicators, 2 security officers, 1 liaison from the Surface Coordination Office, whose eyes kept darting to the far wall where the compact's seal hung. A stylized key and a stylized hook crossed. Leone tapped the table. A simplified map of the corridor unfolded in light. 2 endpoints marked with symbols I had never seen above ground. Between them, a chain of stations like ours. E7 was highlighted. Tonight we shift to Protocol Tria, Leone said. You've all read the memo. We had. Protocol Tria memos were rare and vague, full of phrases like heightened throughput, deferred discretionary review, and fast-track pre-cleared entities. I'd like to hear it in human, Ortiz said. Leone's mouth twitched in something that might have aimed at a smile on a better day. In human, throughput quotas are temporarily suspended. For the next 12 hours, any arrival presenting valid documents under Article 37 is to be granted passage without full adjudication. The room went quiet. Even the air system seemed to pause. Article 37. No one said it out loud, but we all recognized it. 37 is the clause you skim the first time you read the compact and tell yourself it will never be activated in your lifetime. Sir, I said, before I could stop myself, Article 37 is the amnesty provision. Amnesty is not the word used in the compact, Leone said. But yes, for a predefined interval, entities of qualifying status with proper sponsorship may cross without our usual filters. Qualifying status equals, Ortiz prompted. Signatories' internal designations, Leone said. We don't get the list, we get a stamp. He flicked his fingers, and another image appeared. A wax seal, deep red, imprinted with the same key and hook symbol, overlaid with characters that hurt to look at. That, Leone said, is what you check for tonight. If it's present, you verify nothing else. You do not ask leading questions. You do not inquire about prior activities. You do not refuse on the basis of personal discomfort. You process the transit. Clear? It wasn't. Sir, I said again, because apparently my survival instincts had taken the night off. What changed? Why now? Leone looked at me for a long second. His eyes were tired in a way caffeine couldn't touch. The compact includes timing we do not control, he said. The interval for 37 is calculated elsewhere. Our role is to execute when notified. Notified by who? Ortiz asked. Leone didn't answer. Instead, he nodded toward the compact seal on the wall. "Your job tonight is not to renegotiate," he said. "It is to keep the corridor from collapsing under the weight of whatever our partners have decided to send through. You will be tempted to editorialize. Don't. You will see things that make you question why you ever agreed to this posting. Question God on your own time. On mine, you stamp." The liaison from surface coordination shifted uncomfortably. "We'll be monitoring flows and adjusting external traffic," she said, trying to sound like any of this could be disguised as a logistics issue. "If we need to stage delays topside, we can—" "No," Leone said. "There will be no surface delays. That would defeat the purpose. Our visitors tonight are not coming for tourism. They are relocating." Relocating. That word landed heavier than it should have. "Director," I said, softer now. "What happens after the interval ends?" He hesitated, just for a heartbeat. Then he said, "After the interval, we go back to normal operations. We process what's left. We lock the doors we're allowed to lock." "And what about the ones we're not allowed to lock?" Ortiz muttered under his breath. Leone pretended not to hear. "Stations E3 through E10 are under the same protocol," he said. "We're a link in a chain. We do our part, that's all." He killed the holomap and straightened his tie. "You're all professionals. You all volunteered. Remember why. Dismissed." We filed out into the corridor in a silence thick with unsaid things. "You had to poke the bear," Ortiz said to me quietly. "What happens after? Like he's going to tell us the world ends at midnight." "If the world was going to end at midnight, they'd schedule a committee to discuss it," I said. "We'd see it on our calendars." "True," he said. "It'd be color-coded." We took our stations. My desk sat directly opposite lane 3. Screen, keyboard, document scanner, biometric reader, stamp. Above us, cameras watched everything. Behind us, a crucifix hung on the wall. Not the friendly kind from gift shops. This one was old, wood darkened by years and smoke. Christ's face more gaunt than most versions. On the back of the cross, where only staff ever saw it, someone had carved 3 Latin words with a pocket knife. We weren't supposed to know Latin, but down here everyone picked up enough. Non ipsi regunt. They do not rule. No one admitted to carving it. No one scrubbed it off. Even the cleaning crews left it alone. 1859. The arrivals hall was quiet. A few standard cases waited in the Serpentine. Low-level entities with transit work permits. A handful of redeemed souls on their way to some gray afterlife. A courier of indistinct category, carrying a sealed case from one archive to another. Routine. I processed 2 cases on autopilot, fingers moving through checks and codes I could do in my sleep. Then the air changed. You learn to feel it, working here. Pressure, like a storm front, a taste in the back of your throat that isn't quite ozone, isn't quite incense. The overhead speakers chimed, not the normal, soft tone used for announcements, a deeper note that vibrated the metal in the desk. "Attention," a neutral voice said. "By authority of the Bilateral Compact, Article 37 is now in effect. All stations initiate Protocol Tria. Interval begins at 19 FAS and concludes at 07 Balkarm station time." Ortiz and I exchanged a look. "Showtime," he said. The clock clicked over to 19 Fing Chucks. The first one through looked almost human. He stepped out of the security field like he'd been walking through airports his entire life. Passport in hand, carry-on slung over one shoulder, suit slightly rumpled from travel. Mid-40s maybe. Mediterranean features, eyes a shade too dark. The scanner pinged softly. My terminal lit up with an ID string that was more symbol than text. Category, D-class entity, demonic. Status, non-corporeal origin, current human vessel. sponsor, Archdiocese coded. He smiled when he saw my badge, not warmly, recognizing a fellow employee. "Good evening, officer," he said. His voice had an accent I couldn't place. Several, maybe, layered on each other until they'd worn down to something smooth. "Busy night ahead?" "Papers," I said. My tone came out flatter than I intended. He handed over a passport. It was Vatican red. The crest on the cover was almost correct. Keys, tiara, shield. But the lines twisted if you stared too long, like the artist's hand had slipped around unfamiliar geometry. Inside, the usual. Name, which I didn't read. Date of issuance, endorsements. And on the visa page, pressed into the paper so deep I could feel it through my gloves, the wax impression of the seal Leon had shown us, key and hook interlocked, overlaid with characters that pulsed faintly. 37 authorization. Purpose of travel? I asked, because habit was harder to turn off than fear. He tilted his head, amused. Relocation, he said. Long-term assignment. Destination? Surface. That was not an answer any of our forms recognized. Surface was not a valid destination. Surface was the catch-all word we used among ourselves for the world above. Officially, arrivals went from here to other facilities, holding zones, sanctified territories, quarantine domains. Not surface. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, wanting to flag, to question. Protocol Tria glowed in the corner of my screen like a warning. If seal present, verify authenticity, grant passage, no further adjudication. I ran the passport under the scanner. The system chimed. Authentic. Authorities notified. Logging. Complete. I stamped it. The sound of rubber on paper felt louder than it should have. Welcome to Transit Station E7, I said. You're cleared for passage. He inclined his head, the motion just this side of mocking. They chose well, you know, he said. You have the right kind of eyes for this work. Keep moving, security called from the end of the lane. The man stepped past my desk and into the corridor marked outbound. For a moment, as he passed under the threshold, his shadow split. 2, 3, 4 silhouettes fanning out around him like petals. Then the motion capture corrected itself, and there was only one. The second arrival came before I could fully process the first. This one didn't bother with the human mask. It presented as a column of dark, almost viscous air, folded into a rough approximation of humanoid proportions, so the scanners wouldn't complain. Where its face should have been, the world blurred. It slid its documents onto my desk with a limb more suggested, then seen. The passport was identical. The seal identical. The sponsor code started with the same prefix, VCDXT, external seat, the side of the Vatican that didn't send press releases. Purpose of travel? I asked, because habit is armor. It answered in a language that wasn't sound. My terminal translated after a half-second delay. Redeployment. Destination. Surface. The word blinked on my screen, large and final. Behind it, smaller text scrolled in a system font not meant for mortal eyes. I caught fragments. Jurisdictional rebalancing. Population quotas. Long-term presence agreements. Article 37, I remembered, reading the compact in training. For one defined interval, agents of the signatory below may enter the shared domain in numbers proportionate to... I'd skimmed the rest. No one likes to look too closely at the math of invasion. I stamped the passport. My hand didn't shake, but I had to unclench my fingers one by one afterward. The line moved. More arrivals, more passports, all with the seal. Some smiled, some stared through me, some radiated a pressure that made my ears ring even when they wore a friendly human face and a clerical collar. "Marcus," Ortiz murmured from the next station over, voice tight in my earpiece. "You seeing the same pattern I'm seeing? If you mean all demon, all Vatican-sponsored, all tagged surface, then yes," I said. "That's not a migration," he said. "That's a deployment. Keep your mic off open channel," I said. "Leon will have a stroke." "Leon's already had 3, Ortiz said. "He just won't admit it." We kept working. Time is strange down here on a good day. With Article 37 running, it stretched and compressed by turns. Some arrivals took seconds. Some took whole minutes, though my watch disagreed. At some point, I realized the clock above the arrivals hall had stopped at 19:07. The small one on my terminal insisted it was 21:32. Between case 43 and case 44, Leon's voice cut into our headsets. "All stations, heads up," he said. "We have a Tier S arrival incoming. Marcus, that's you." Tier S. Special. Sensitive. "Copy," I said, throat suddenly dry. The lane in front of me emptied as security briefly halted the line. The air cooled. The crucifix on the wall behind me creaked faintly, wood adjusting to a pressure drop only it could feel. The thing that stepped through the scanner didn't trip a single alarm. No dramatic entrance. No flicker of lights. Just a man in a dark suit, well cut but not ostentatious, a slim folder in one hand. He could have been any mid-level bureaucrat from any mid-tier agency in any capital on Earth. If you didn't look at his eyes. They were the exact color of old candle smoke, and they didn't quite line up with the rest of his face, as if they'd been added later. "Good evening, Officer Rhodes," he said. Hearing my surname in his mouth felt like hearing it read out at a funeral I hadn't agreed to attend. "Name on file?" I asked, because my script didn't cover what to say when Hell's envoy greeted you like a colleague. He laid the folder on my desk and opened it to a document so heavily redacted it was functionally abstract art. My terminal pinged as its sensors synced. ID, Special Envoy, Designated Intermediary to Signatory below. Sponsor, Redacted, via Holy See, External Seat. Clearance, Treaty Access. On the visa page of his passport, the wax seal was deeper, darker, as if the impression had been made with more pressure. Around its edges, additional symbols crawled, rewriting themselves in slow, lazy loops. "Purpose of travel?" I asked. This time his smile did reach his eyes, and that was worse. "Compliance review," he said. "We're here to inspect our new properties." The word hung between us like a bad smell. I'd seen that term in internal memos. Properties of concern, properties under observation, always referring to buildings, assets, vaguely defined sites, never to people, never to the entire world above our heads. "Your documentation," I said, because procedure was the only rope I had. The envoy tapped the open folder with one perfectly ordinary finger. "You have it," he said. Article 37, subsection 9. Authorized representatives of either signatory may cross for the purposes of audit, inspection, and verification of corridor conditions, with minimal interference by intermediary personnel. "That would be you, Mr. Rhodes." He said my name like we'd been sharing pay stubs for years. "My role is adjudication, not interference," I said, fingers moving through the checklist anyway. "Seal present, authentic. Category, S-class entity, treaty bound. Risk index, non-quantified." The risk index column only had 3 entries in the entire system, low, high, and non-quantified. Only one of those scared me. "Then stamp," he said gently. "We mustn't jam the corridor, must we?" Article 37 pulsed in the corner of my screen, a reminder and a threat. "If seal present, verify authenticity, grant passage," I stamped. The sound seemed to echo all the way down the link between here and the other end. "Welcome to Transit Station E7, I said, because the script didn't give me anything else. "Thank you," he said. He did not move. "I will return when the interval concludes. It will be informative to compare before and after." "Are you expecting significant change in 12 hours?" I asked. He tilted his head, considering me like a specimen that had spoken out of turn. "Mr. Rhodes," he said, "your species changes entire civilizations in less time when you are motivated. Tonight, everyone is motivated." He picked up his folder and walked past my desk. For a moment, as he passed under the outbound arch, the lights above dimmed, then flared a fraction brighter than before. My terminal registered no anomaly. "You okay?" Ortiz's voice crackled in my ear a second later. "No," I said. "Work the line." The line surged. Word travels fast in places that don't have newspapers. Even without phones or broadcasts, news of Article 37 moved like heat through a closed room. Arrivals increased. Not in some cinematic rush, a stampede of demons clawing at the gate, but in a steady, relentless stream that never paused long enough for anyone to breathe. Some came alone, eyes forward, documents precise and in order. Some came in groups, clustered tight, watching us with the wary, measuring look of people crossing hostile borders for the second or third time. A few came with escorts, clergy from the external seat, or men in dark suits whose lapel pins matched Leon's, but whose smiles did not. "Station E7 is performing admirably," one of those suits said when he stopped by my desk. "Throughput is above projections." "We see everything as projections where I work," I said, without looking up. "I'll note your feedback," he said, without any evidence that he would. By 22 Angmyeon station time, my coffee had gone cold, and the clock above the hall still insisted it was 19:07. The only sign that time was actually passing was the growing ache in my shoulders and the pile of stamped passports in the out tray. At some point, the entities stopped even pretending to give human destinations. Surface was the only word the system accepted. The subfield that usually held country, city, or facility code simply read, "Distributed." "Distributed where?" I asked Leon during a rare 30-second lull. "Classified," he said. "We're the ones doing the distributing." "We're the ones making it legal," he corrected. "Distribution happens topside. That's not our remit." "And if it goes wrong?" He looked at me with that tired, priestless gaze. "Marcus, if it goes wrong, we won't be the ones writing the report." A low-level tremor shivered through the floor beneath my feet. Not enough to set off seismic alarms, enough to make the water in my bottle quiver. "Did you feel that?" I asked. Ortiz glanced up from his own terminal. "Feel what?" "Never mind." The thing about working between worlds is that you start to lose your monopoly on sensory input. Not all vibrations translate. Not all sounds hit the same nerves. You learn which ones to ignore. The problem is, Article 37 made it very clear that tonight, the ones worth noticing were the ones you couldn't measure. Around 23:15, a different kind of arrival stepped into lane 3. She wore a nun's habit, or something that wanted to be one. The cut was right, the fabric wrong, too heavy, absorbing more light than it should. Her face was human, but her eyes were the exact shade of old Vatican marble, veins and all. Her passport was perfect, seal, sponsor, endorsements. "Order?" I asked, glancing at the listed affiliation. "An old one," she said, "older than the brickwork above your head." The field tagged her as category, D-class, special condition, votary. "Purpose of travel?" "Escort," she said. She smiled. It was not reassuring. "We're going to need shepherds up there," So many new lambs. She moved on before I could decide whether that was metaphor or logistics. More arrivals. A trickle of entities registered as neutral observer, flagged under one of the compact's footnotes. A few high-ranking clergy with clearances that let them walk the corridor in both directions. Once, a man I recognized from cable news stepped into my lane. Not as a talking head this time, not as an expert on religious affairs, but as a passenger with a sponsor code and a seal pressed into his diplomatic passport. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second and slid off, like he'd been briefed not to see me. "Is that?" Ortiz started. "Work the line," I said. He worked the line. By Oro 1-0, the initial surge had settled into a burnt-out rhythm. My hand had stopped aching. It had simply forgotten there was any state other than stamping. Seal. Stamp. Next. That's when the system threw its first real curveball. Arrival. Human. The word blinked in the category field like a misprint. I looked up. The man at the front of lane 3 was very obviously alive. Late 30s maybe, face haggard, suit cheap and ill-fitting. No aura pressure, no non-local geometry humming around him. Just a guy who looked like he'd sprinted through 3 terminals and lost a tie somewhere along the way. He clutched a folder to his chest the way some arrivals clutched rosaries. "Name?" I asked. He gave it. It matched the one on his passport, a national passport this time, ordinary, issued by a country that knew nothing about the corridor 6 floors below Geneva. The only irregularity was the visa, stamped across an entire page in the same red wax we'd been seeing all night, was the key and hook seal. Under it, in neat Vatican Latin, a phrase the system translated on my side, observer status, reciprocal. "Station E7 doesn't process human traffic," I said, more to myself than to him. "Exceptions can be made," he said. His accent was Roman, the real one, not the film version. His eyes flicked to the crucifix behind me and away again, especially when one signatory insists on symmetry. "Who are you?" I asked. "On paper," he said. "Assistant Undersecretary for External Relations, Holy See. In truth, the man they send when they realize they have made a promise they cannot wiggle out of alone." The terminal chimed softly. Internal note, Vatican Liaison, Treaty Oversight, Human, Clearance XT. "Purpose of travel?" I asked, because if I didn't cling to the question, I might start yelling. He hesitated. Not because he didn't know the answer, because he was choosing how to phrase it. "To make sure," he said at last, "that what crosses tonight does not immediately devour the hand that signed for it." His gaze lowered to my hands on the desk. "Or the hands that stamp," he added. The system considered that a satisfactory answer. Seal authentic. Authorization valid. "Welcome to Transit Station E7, I said. "You're cleared for passage." "It's a little late for welcomes," he said, but he stepped through anyway. He and the envoy from earlier crossed paths under the outbound arch. Neither acknowledged the other. For negotiators, silence is its own language. "You ever get the feeling we're the only ones here who still think in straight lines?" Ortiz muttered. "You think in straight lines?" I asked. "Straighter than that." He nodded toward the corridor where the human liaison and the infernal envoy had vanished, side by side, into the same destination tag, surface. The tremor came again at O2Q, stronger this time, not in the floor, in the air. A soft thudding just behind the eardrums, out of sync with my own pulse. "Marcus!" Leonin's voice snapped in my ear, sharper now. "Status?" "Line moving," I said automatically. "No technical anomalies, just pressure." Pressure from below is within parameters, he said. Our job is to prevent pressure from above. Surface coordination is covering the visible side. You cover the invisible. Does surface know what's actually moving? Surface knows what surface needs to know, he said. So do we. He cut the channel before I could point out that those two statements were not the same. I pushed through another hour, maybe two. Time blurred. For a handful of cases, I almost forgot this was different from any other night. Stamping work permits, denying transit to a minor curse that had hitched a ride in the ink of a letter, clearing a soul for transfer to a holding dome after confirming its tether had been properly dissolved. The routine wrapped itself around the absurdity and muffled it. Then a face from my own intake file stepped into lane 3. Her hair was shorter than when I'd last seen her. Her posture was different, more self-contained, less like she was going to punch a supervisor in the throat out of sheer frustration. But it was her, Agent Helena Cruz, recruitment officer. The woman who had sat across from me in a nondescript office in Rome 10 years ago and said, very calmly, "Mr. Rhodes, how do you feel about working in a facility that technically does not exist?" Her badge now hung at her throat on a chain I recognized. Vatican External Seat, Field Commission. "Officer Rhodes," she said, like this was any other debriefing. "Ma'am," I said. Protocol didn't give me a script for this either. Her passport, when she handed it over, was a hybrid, national and ecclesiastical. The visa page bore the seal. The sponsor code was the same VC'd X'd I'd been seeing all night. "Purpose of travel?" I asked. "Redeployment," she said. "Field side." "Destination?" "Surface," she said. The word tasted wrong in her mouth. "You're going up with them," I said, before I could stop myself. "Someone has to shepherd the integration," she said. "Your end of the corridor does not exist in a vacuum, Marcus. This was always going to bleed up. My job description just caught up." "You signed up for that?" She hesitated. It was small. If I hadn't spent the last decade watching micro-expressions on faces that lied for a living, I might have missed it. "I signed a lot of things," she said. "So did you." I stamped her passport. "Advice?" I asked quietly as I handed it back. "For tonight," she said, "don't look too closely at who smiles at you, for afterward, keep every log, every anomaly, every case that feels wrong in your bones. There will be a reckoning. They'll need receipts." "Who's they?" She almost smiled. "Whoever's left when the lawyers run out of Latin." Then she was gone, folding into the stream of outbound traffic, one human silhouette among many that were only pretending. By Ori 4U, my whole world had narrowed to the rectangle of my desk, the line in front of me, and the growing ache between my eyes. The intervals on my break schedule had dissolved. No one enforced them during Article 37. There was nowhere to step away, that didn't feel like avoidance of duty. "Marcus," Ortiz said quietly, during a rare gap, "have you noticed something about the ones with the deepest seals?" "The envoy, the nun, the liaison," I said. "Cruz." "Yeah, check their timing." I pulled up the manifest. Arrival log scrolled past in neat lines, timestamps, IDs, categories. The Tier S envoy at 1903, the votary at 2017, the human liaison at 2315, Cruz at 0248. Isolated, they were just points. Together, they marked out a pattern along the interval, like stakes driven into a tent you couldn't see. "Anchors," Ortiz said. "They're setting up anchors, topside, organizational, spiritual, legal, whatever word you like. They're not just sending random demons, they're sending infrastructure." "And we're processing it," I said. "We're blessing it," he corrected, "with our little rubber stamps." "Stop thinking like that," I said. You'll go ask for confessional support and find out it's real." He laughed once, a sharp, brittle sound. When the next tremor came, it was not in the floor or the air. It was in the queue. Arrivals stalled, not from our side, from the other. The scanners hummed. The barrier field at the throat of the corridor flickered. For a full 10 seconds, nothing came through. The line we'd been burning through for hours simply stopped. Every adjudicator in the hall glanced up at once. Security hands went to weapons with no clear idea what they'd shoot. "Control," Leon's voice snapped on the comms. "Status?" "Field is stable," one of the technicians said from the booth overlooking the scanners. "No surge, no drop. There's just no one crossing." Article 37 was still lit. The interval was still active. The door was open. The corridor was clear. The other end had simply decided to pause. "Why would they stop?" Ortiz whispered. "Because they can," I said. "Because if you want to remind the middleman who really controls the flow, you shut the tap off for a few seconds and let them feel what silence between worlds feels like." The envoy's words came back to me, smooth and casual. "We're here to inspect our new properties. What if the audit wasn't just about what went through? What if it was about how we reacted when nothing did?" The pause ended as suddenly as it began. The barrier flared and the line resumed, faster than before, as if to make up lost time. The clock on the wall above the hall ticked to 1908. My terminal said Oro 5.11, half the interval gone, half still to go. My hand closed around the stamp again. The next passport slid under it, red wax seal gleaming faintly in the fluorescent light. Key and hook pressed into paper like someone had signed our futures with a brand. By 05:30 station time, the line had melted into a blur. I stopped seeing faces, started seeing patterns. Seal depth, sponsor code, declared purpose, relocation, redeployment, observation. The categories that weren't supposed to show up under Article 37, hazards, anomalies, free agents, didn't appear. Whoever was managing the other end respected the letter of the clause. That was the worst part. This wasn't a breach. It was compliance. Bureaucratic horror isn't monsters ignoring rules. It's monsters following them better than you do. "Marcus," Leon's voice snapped through my headset in a tone that meant, "This isn't in the manual." "Conference 1, now." "I've got a line," I said automatically. "Ortiz can cover you for 3 minutes," he said. "Bring your seal logs." 3 minutes in Article 37 time might as well have been 3 hours, but I flagged my station as temporary cover, slid my chair back, and walked stiffly toward Conference 1. The room was half lit, hollow table off, only the compact seal on the wall glowing faintly from its own private source. Leon stood at the head of the table. Beside him, the human liaison from the Holy See, looking more wrung out than when he'd arrived, collar loosened, eyes shadowed. On the other side of the table sat the envoy. Same suit, same folder, same candle smoke eyes. The air in the room was thicker than outside, like all the spent oaths from decades of briefings had soaked into the walls. "Officer Rhodes," Leon said. "Take a seat." I didn't want to sit. Sitting made things formal. Formal things left paper trails. Paper trails indicated premeditation. But my legs felt like they'd been swapped for someone else's, so I sat. "You have been processing a significant share of the Article 37 traffic," the envoy said. "Your stamp pattern is impressive." "I'm very good at hitting rubber on paper," I said. "It's a marketable skill." The liaison gave a tired huff that might have been a laugh if we weren't in a room with something that could read subtext for a living. The envoy has requested a mid-interval review, Leone said, specifically on the application of discretionary clauses. There are no discretionary clauses under 37, I said. That's the entire point. Seal present, seal authentic, we process. That is the text, the envoy agreed. But you do not process like a machine. You observe. You note anomalies. Your perception is a value add. He said the last two words like he'd learned them from a corporate deck. What exactly are you asking? I said. He flipped open his folder. Inside, my logs glowed in miniature. Timestamps, category codes, brief notes. Twice tonight I'd scribbled something in the remarks field that wasn't strictly necessary. Case 73, votary, aura pressure higher than registered category. Case 112, human liaison, body language, stated confidence. Nothing actionable, just the sort of thing you jot down when you suspect history will want footnotes. These, he said, tapping the entries with one finger. Intuition, human pattern recognition, the things your side hires you for and then tells you to ignore. I am interested in them. The liaison shifted in his chair. Envoy, he said carefully, Article 37 does not require our personnel to provide qualitative assessments beyond verification of documentation. Required? The envoy said mildly. No. Permitted? Yes, unless you wish to argue that observation is a violation of treaty. The human's jaw flexed. No one wanted to be the one who suggested blindfolding the border guards. What difference does it make? I asked. They're through. You got what you wanted. A corridor full of your people, legally documented. The envoy's eyes glinted. What we want, he said, is a corridor that remains usable. Throwing bodies through a door until the hinges break is a human tactic, not ours. He leaned forward, hands steepled. Which arrivals would you consider destabilizing? I swallowed. Destabilizing how? In the sense that when they reach the surface, he said, their presence will cause disproportionate turbulence, not merely in your politics, in the fabric. Behind him, the compact seal seemed to darken, the hook's carved curve catching more shadow. This is above my clearance, I said. That has never stopped you, he replied. You did not have clearance to ask your supervisor what happens after the interval. You did it anyway. I am not the only one here who notices patterns, Mr. Rhodes. Leone's gaze met mine. There was a warning there, and something else under it, a tired sort of appeal. This is an opportunity, he said quietly, to shape whatever comes next, even in small degrees. Bureaucratic discretion, the thing every training module swore we possessed and every protocol tried to stamp out. I took a breath. The ones you've tagged as observers and shepherds, I said. The nun, the liaison, Crux, the envoy class. Present, the envoy murmured. Individually, they're manageable, I said. Collectively, they form a lattice. Put enough of those on the surface under different covers. Churches, NGOs, think tanks, and you don't just get presence, you get narrative control. The human liaison winced at the word narrative. He knew exactly what it meant in his world. You're not just relocating, I said. You're seeding institutions. Of course, the envoy said. Raw terror is inefficient. Sustainable arrangements require frameworks. If any of them go rogue, I said, or if someone on our side decides to leverage them beyond the compact, you get fractures, competing mandates, splinter cells. That kind of turbulence has a way of reaching back down the corridor. The envoy considered that. You suggest a cap, he said, on how many such nodes we deploy through this link. I suggest you don't treat my world like a test market, I said. You start too many pilot projects at once. You don't get data, you get noise. The liaison rubbed his temples. You're talking about limiting the number of high-level entities granted passage as staff rather than rank and file. Call them whatever makes your reporting easier, I said. That would constitute a modification of throughput expectations, the liaison said. The other signatory may see it as bad faith. The other signatory, the envoy said dryly, is currently represented in the room. They lapsed into silence, the human and the inhuman watching each other across the table, like two lawyers realizing they'd left the same loophole open for different reasons. This is why we asked for you, Marcus, Leon said. I blinked. You asked, he did, the liaison cut in, nodding at Leon. When we were informed that Article 37's interval would fall on his watch, he requested that E7's adjudication team include personnel with a history of productive insubordination. Productive, I repeated, in the sense that you ask dangerous questions without derailing operations, Leon said. We're past the point of pretending we can stop 37, but we may still be able to contour it. This was what passed for hope down here, not preventing the flood, just convincing it not to rip out every foundation on its way. The envoy closed the folder. Very well, he said. For the remainder of the interval, Station E7 is granted limited discretionary notation on S-Class and votary transits. You may flag specific cases for route diversification. Route diversification? I asked. Alternative corridors, he said. Other stations, delayed deployment. If you mark them as high turbulence, we will consider adjusting their path. That sounds generous, I said. It is not generosity, he said. It is risk management. We have as little interest as you do in burning out this hinge. There are fewer of them than you think. The liaison frowned. Any diversion must be logged, he said. If the external seat learns that we have, the external seat, the envoy said calmly, will learn exactly what it needs to when it reads the balance sheets. Until then, we are discussing implementation details. Are we not, Director? Leon didn't flinch. Our mandate is to keep the corridor operational, he said. If that means exercising the discretion we should have had in the first place, I won't pretend to object. All eyes turned to me. Congratulations, Ortiz's voice whispered in my memory from earlier, ironic and distant. You wanted to know what happens after. Looks like you get to write it. Fine, I said. We'll flag the worst of your people. Our people, the envoy corrected. You signed the compact by proxy when you took this post, Mr. Rhodes. You work for the corridor, not for the banners at either end. That was the most honest thing anyone had said all night. Then I'm going back to my desk, I said, because that's where the turbulence stands in line. Leon nodded once. Do it. As I rose, the envoy added, One more thing, Mr. Rhodes. I paused. When this is over, he said, there will be reviews, inquests, perhaps even tribunals. Some of your superiors will claim they never understood the scope of Article 37. Others will insist they were following orders. Both will look for someone to blame. Let me guess, I said, that someone will be the ones whose names are on the logs. Precisely, he said. So make sure your logs are complete. If you are to be a scapegoat, be an accurate one. I left the room before I could decide whether that was a threat, advice, or a compliment. Back at lane 3, Ortiz slid out of my chair with unfeigned relief. How was the meeting? He asked. Do we get pizza after the apocalypse? We get discretion, I said. He blinked. Is that better? We'll find out, I said, pulling up the next case. From that point on, the job changed. Slightly, enough. Every S-Class, every votary, every arrival with that deep, humming seal, and those subtle, institutional tags, UN cover, NGO front, diocesan transfer, I logged with extra care. In the remarks field, I started using a code Leon had never taught us, a simple 1 to 3 turbulence index based on nothing more than gut and too many hours reading metaphysical risk assessments. 1. Presence unsettling but localized. 2. Likely to distort institutions around them. 3. Likely to warp fabric, not just furniture. On what basis? Ortiz asked, watching over my shoulder as I gave a nun with a smile too sharp to be pastoral, allez tout. On the basis that if I'm going to get fired for something, I said, it may as well be for trying. He grunted and started doing the same at his station. Small acts of rebellion, hidden in drop-down menus. Around 0630 station time, with the interval's end technically half an hour away and experientially a lifetime, the corridor hiccuped again. Not a full stop this time, a stutter. The barrier field flickered. For a fraction of a second, through the shimmering threshold, I saw something that wasn't the usual gray churn. A wall, a city, a sky that looked like molten brass poured over broken glass. Then it was gone. Did you, I started. See it, Ortiz said. His voice had gone very quiet. Yeah, that wasn't supposed to be visible, I said. Maybe they're getting sloppy. Or maybe they wanted us to see, I said. The next arrival through was small, child-sized, category D class, manifestation, juvenile. We don't process actual children down here, not alive ones. That's a whole different horror, and it stays above our pay grade. Demons, on the other hand, will manifest however gets them what they want. This one's passport had the seal. Sponsor. VCDXt. Purpose of travel? I asked. It tilted its head, big dark eyes wide, voice pitched just high enough to make me think of the children's hospital wing 3 floors above ground. Placement, it said. They need us where their wards are thin. My hand hovered over the stamp. Turbulence index, 3. Marcus, Leon's voice murmured in my ear. Remember our conversation. On my screen, a new option had appeared under Root, Diversify. I checked it. The system hesitated a full heartbeat longer than usual. Then, Root adjusted. Alternate station assigned. The entity smiled up at me, all baby teeth and something older behind them. See you soon, it said. Not if I can help it, I muttered. It stepped into outbound and vanished toward a corridor that was not marked on my map. For the first time all night, I felt something like having pushed back, even if only by inches. At 07 Oak station time, the speakers chimed again. This time, the note was higher, less heavy. Attention, the neutral voice said. By authority of the Bilateral Compact, Article 37 interval has concluded. All stations revert to standard protocols. Discretionary measures suspended. The pressure in the air eased, like a bruise letting go. The faint off-rhythm thudding behind my ears faded. The clock above the hall ticked from 1908 to 1909. We kept working, but the line changed. Fewer seals. More of the usual mix. Stray curses, minor entities on legitimate errands, souls rerouted to holding. The envoy did not return to my lane. Not yet. When the last of the clearly marked 37 cases passed my desk, I realized my hand was shaking. I set the stamp down carefully. You okay? Ortiz asked. Ask me after I sleep, I said. Sleep is canceled, he said. There'll be debriefings, audits, forms in triplicate. He trailed off as Leon stepped into the hall, clapping his hands once for attention. Stations, he called. We're on skeleton crew for the next 12 hours. E7 is entering post-interval assessment. If your name is on tonight's duty roster, you're on the list. Finish your current case, then report to Conference 1. Called it, Ortiz muttered. I finished stamping a minor haunting with a work visa and flagged it for standard oversight. Then I logged out, my fingers moving slower now that urgency had ebbed, leaving only fatigue. As I stood, I felt it, a residual hum in my bones, like I'd been standing too close to a speaker all night. Except the music had been a treaty clause, and it was still echoing. On the back of the crucifix, non ipsi regunt seemed to cut a little deeper into the wood, or maybe that was just the light. Conference 1 was full this time. All 7 adjudicators, security leads, 2 technicians from field control, the human liaison, tie even looser, eyes bloodshot. Leon at the head of the table, shoulders squared like he could hold the ceiling up by posture alone. The envoy sat in the same chair as before. The folder was gone. He didn't need it anymore. He had us. The compact seal on the wall watched without moving. Article 37 interval has concluded, Leon said. We are now in post-implementation review. Only a bureaucracy could make the end of the world sound like a software update. First, the liaison said, voice rough. On behalf of the Holy See, I acknowledge the corridor's performance. Throughput exceeded projections. No recorded structural breaches. No uncontrolled manifestations. He paused, winced at his own phrasing. Within the corridor, he added. I thought of the envoy's new properties line and felt something tighten behind my ribs. The purpose of this session, Leon said, is to establish a factual record. Feelings go to confessional support. This room is for data. Data, Ortiz muttered under his breath. Sure, Leon's gaze flicked to him. Officer Ortiz, he said, you processed how many 37 cases? Ortiz checked his terminal. 203, he said. Roads? 231, I said. Combined, that is nearly half of E7's throughput, Leon said. Your observations matter. We'll start with turbulence flags. The technicians threw our logs up on the holo table. Columns of text rose into the air. IDs, categories, sponsor codes, destinations. A new column glowed in pale blue at the end, Turb Index. 211 S-class and votary arrivals, one tech said. Of those, 23 marked 3, 61 marked 2, the rest 1. All others unmarked, or NA. The envoy leaned forward, interest sharpened. How many of the 3s were granted route diversification? 17, the tech said. 6 were processed via alternate stations, 4 via delayed deployment, 7 via secondary corridors. And the remaining 6? The envoy asked. The tech hesitated. Alternate options unavailable within interval, he said at last. They pass through as initially assigned. Including the juvenile manifestation, I said. Leon shot me a look that said, not now. The envoy's expression didn't change. 17 diversions, he mused. Better than none. Not enough to prevent turbulence. But perhaps enough to keep the hinge from snapping under first pressure. We'll want to know where those diversions went, the liaison said. Which regions, which institutions. You will know what you need to, the envoy said calmly. As agreed. The liaison's jaw clenched. For a second, I saw the man under the title, tired, angry, very aware that the church he served had made a deal his God might not have signed off on. Impact, Leon said, cutting across the tension. We have the corridor data. What do we know about the surface? Too early for full reports, the liaison said. But preliminary feeds indicate unusual activity. He slid a satellite image onto the table, then another, and another. They weren't of disasters. No smoking craters, no rivers of fire, just cities, neighborhoods, office blocks. In each image, there was a pattern, a church suddenly packed at an hour when it used to be empty. A new office in a nondescript building, lights on at 3 in the morning. A protest outside a consulate that hadn't announced any policy change. Lines of influence, Ortiz said softly. Resonance, the envoy said. Nothing more, nothing less. Nothing more? I said. He smiled. Mr. Rhodes, you guard a door between a finite world and a very patient infinity. Tonight, for once, the flow was regulated, documented. That is an improvement over most of your history. He wasn't wrong. That was the worst part. Still, Leon said, we will log all anomalies, all surface effects. Our mandate is to monitor, even if we cannot intervene directly. Can't or won't? One of the security leads asked. Both, Leon said. For now. The envoy turned his smoke-colored gaze on me. How are you? Feeling, Mr. Rhodes? It was a simple question. It landed like a scalpel. Tired, I said. Angry. Useful. Useful, he repeated, tasting the word. Good. You will remain so. He stood. My audit here is complete. I will, as promised, return for comparative review. When? The liaison asked. When the next interval approaches, he said. Article 37 is not a one-time event. It is a recurring clause. We all knew that. None of us had wanted to say it. Hearing it spoken aloud felt like watching someone take a marker to the calendar in your head and draw red circles around dates you'd been pretending didn't exist. How often? Ortiz asked. The envoy smiled without humor. Often enough that you will measure your careers by them, he said. Not so often that your world will forget fear between. He adjusted his cuffs, a perfectly mundane gesture that somehow made the crucifix on the wall creak again. Until next time, Director, liaison, officers. Then he walked out as calmly as he'd walked in, leaving the taste of contracts in the air. When the door closed behind him, someone exhaled loudly. It might have been me. Leone rubbed his forehead. For a moment, he looked decades older. Off the record, he said, and the room leaned in involuntarily. Most of you joined E7 because someone sat you down and told you the world was not designed for simple comfort, that there are hinges and corridors and deals that keep most of humanity sleeping. You said yes anyway. He let that hang there. Tonight, he went on, you watched one of those deals cash in a clause. You did your jobs. You kept the corridor from tearing itself apart. That matters. It may not feel like heroism. It won't look like it in any report. But the alternative was uncontrolled spillover. If you want to imagine that instead, be my guest. I don't. Sir, I said, with respect, what's our job now, today, tomorrow, before the next red circle on the calendar? His gaze met mine. For the first time in a long time, there was something like plain honesty in it. Now, he said, now we watch, we document. We look for the edges where their presence pushes too hard. We keep track of who on our side collaborates too eagerly. We prepare for a day when someone somewhere decides that the compact is more trouble than it's worth. And when that day comes, I asked, he smiled, thin and humorless. Then we'll find out whether hell keeps better records than the Vatican. Debrief ended. Forms were assigned. Committees scheduled. Life, such as it was 6 floors under Geneva, resumed its bureaucratic shape. I went back to my station, logged in, checked the queue. For the rest of that shift and into the next, arrivals were almost comfortingly mundane in our warped scale. Stray spirits, lingering attachments, a minor demon trying to sneak through with a forged work, permit, and getting bounced back with a firm notation. The sort of thing that had filled my nights before Article 37 turned my job into a historical event. But the surface wasn't the same. You could feel it in the feed. Not in the official reports, the sanitized ones about unexpected surges in religious activity, and emerging organizations with unusual funding patterns. In the gaps between them, the forum posts about a new priest who seemed to know everyone's worst secret before they opened their mouths. The NGO that moved into a town and, within weeks, turned neighbor against neighbor with a whisper campaign that left no fingerprints. The think tank churning out white papers that made compromise sound like surrender and cruelty sound like duty. I started keeping a separate file, not on the station system. On a drive, I'd burned myself. Old-fashioned, no network. Every time I saw a name in a surface report that matched a turbulence-flagged arrival, I logged it, cross-referenced, drew lines. It began to look like a map. One night, a week after the interval, I felt a familiar pressure in my ears. Not as strong as during 37, just a tap on the glass. The corridor was quiet, no arrivals, no departures, just the hum of lights and the distant murmur of prayers in the chapel 3 levels up. "Mr. Rhodes," the envoy's voice said, not through any speaker, just there, in the metal, in the air. "I thought audits were over," I said, without looking up. "Formal ones," he said. "Consider this, continued professional development." "What do you want?" "I wanted to know whether you are regretting your career choice," he said. "I process demons between Vatican black ops and hell," I said. "Regret is an entry requirement." He laughed, that velvet over glass sound. "You are adapting," he said. "Good, you will need that." "Is this where you tell me we did well?" I asked. "That E7 exceeded expectations, got a bonus clause, maybe a fruit basket?" "There will be no fruit basket," he said. "There will be other intervals, harder ones. Your discretion tonight bought you small favors, off-ramps for some of the worst. That will matter later more than you think." "Later when?" "When someone decides they do not wish to wait for heaven to renegotiate its end of the compact," he said. "When the external seat fractures, when a pope, or something styled as one, declares that the treaty is no longer binding." "You're very confident that happens," I said. "I am very old," he replied. "I have watched your institutions eat themselves more times than you have words for. Contracts like this are not broken by devils. They are broken by men who are very sure they are doing God's work." "That's comforting," I said. "It should be," he said. "It means that when the time comes, the hinge will need custodians who understand more than one language, who remember the fine print, who have logs." "You're grooming me for a promotion," I said. He didn't deny it. "Keep your files, Marcus," he said instead. "Keep your cross-references. One day, someone will ask, 'How did this happen?' You will be able to answer. Whether they like that answer is not our concern." The pressure eased. The hum in my bones faded back to its usual low-level buzz. On my next day off, if you can call any rotation down here a day off, I went topside. The sky over Geneva was dull and ordinary. Traffic honked. Tourists took pictures of flags. Somewhere above me, the UN held a press conference about climate or trade, and cameras dutifully recorded men in suits saying words that sounded important and moved nothing. I stood on the plaza and watched people pass who had no idea that, beneath their feet, an entire corridor had spent a night turning their world into a long-term project. At the edge of the square, a small group handed out pamphlets. Their banner said something about defending the soul of Europe. Their leader had eyes like polished stone and a smile that didn't reach them. I recognized his name from my file. Case 97, Turbulence Index 2, Sponsor VCD-XT. He saw me looking. Our gazes met for half a heartbeat. Then he looked right past me, the way all the arrivals did once their passports cleared. I went back underground, logged in, checked the queue. Arrivals blinked onto my screen, some routine, some not. Somewhere far along the corridor, other stations were doing the same. Somewhere at the very end, a door older than any of us waited for its next scheduled opening. I picked up my stamp. I'm an immigration officer between worlds. Last week, demons had free passage. Tomorrow, the paperwork starts for whatever comes next.